guess you could fly me in and I could pretend I know how to splice things together. So we'll talk about outside plant and what it means with respect to our software, netTerrain. So I'm Jason with Graphical Networks. We have a software product called netTerrain that allows you to do outside plant, inside plant, and so on. So they're all sort of related to each other. How this works, I'm going to talk for a bit, do a couple polling questions. I'll do one next, and then we just do a demo. I'll just walk you through our software and kind of show you how it works. And then if you have questions, just let me know. It looks like I need to erase these annotations. They stick around. So back to my mouse. So let's try a polling question. Launch poll. How do you currently, I think it's supposed to be word is currently, document your fiber infrastructure? Some open source out there. These are our options: Spreadsheet, Google Earth, open source workarounds such as AutoCAD and other. I'm not sure what other would be. Most of the times I run into things like Spreadsheets. That seems to be the most popular. Maybe not with this group of folks, but Spreadsheets is pretty big. Some Google Earth. Google Earth seems to get some play. It's a little bit limited. Spreadsheets are pretty good. I've seen some really complicated ones. Quite impressive. I guess if you know how to use that particular spreadsheet. Open source. I don't know what open source is out there. I'm sure I've heard of them. It's always nice to have some open source options. It seems that people try and use AutoCAD. AutoCAD's great, obviously, for mapping out paths and things like that. It's a little hard in the strands area. So anyway, we got open source and Spreadsheets seem to be tied for winning. So anyway, thanks for doing that. Moving on. So what we're going to talk about today is sort of building out your network, circuits, things like that, documentation, get questions answered, and so on. So hopefully we'll right into polling question 2. I'm moving right along here. Poll number 2. What are you interested in learning about today? I guess the things I just mentioned, what's important to you: tracing, managing fiber strands, managing the circuits. And when we say circuits, usually for us, that's a defined path between 2 points where you're sort of saying these strands are dedicated to that path and so on. Outside plant assets managing and inside plants managing. And you might hear my dogs barking in the background. Sorry about that. But in the days that we're in now, we're all at home, so we have these little distractions. Oh, I didn't launch the poll. I'm sorry. So I was distracting myself by talking and forgot to actually press the button. Impact, that's good stuff. Managing the strands, good stuff. Also, a lot of people have strands, lots of cables and strands, man. I don't envy you guys having to manage that stuff. Now, if you have a software tool like ours, hopefully it makes it easier, but it's still lots of things to track. So pretty cool. Managing fiber strands seems to be number 1. Tracing outages after that. So I'm going to end that poll. All right. So there we are. So questions and answers at the bottom of the Zoom. I guess there's you can raise your hand, but there's a Q&A. So you can just type a Q&A in there. So if you have a question, feel free to put that in. I still have to see leftover little annotations there. Anyway, so happy to answer your questions at the end, or you can always call us and ask us questions there. So enough with PowerPoint. All right. So this is a demo project I use, and this kind of highlights. I'm going to bring in the duck bank because it's a little nicer to look at. Various buildings and pathways and so on in the tool. But before I get to that, let me just talk a little bit about the software and kind of how you use it, so you understand how you might use the software. So for instance, I got my little blank slate here. I'm just going to grab an object. So on the right-hand side, you should see objects, nodes, racks, devices, and so on. Racks you may or may not care about, because if you're really sticking with outside plant, then you may terminate to a piece of equipment in a building, but you don't necessarily need racks for that. That's more convenience of rack mounting. If you're doing data center management, you might care about the racks and stuff. So I'm just grabbing a generic object. I'm going to use my basketball here and double click on it, since we're all missing sports right now. So if we drill down into this, into my thing called activity, I'm going to add a map. I'm going to right click and we'll say map. And I'm going to add a map, and I'm just going to zoom in a bit on this. We use OpenStreetMaps. That's what we integrate with. I think I did this before. I used Nova Scotia. And click OK. I'm not in Nova Scotia. I'm actually near Washington, D.C., just so you know. I'm just using this as an example because I've never been. And I actually used this before. Yeah. So I'm going to zoom in a bit. And, you know, who doesn't love being near the water? So we'll zoom in a bit more. So with outside plant, you know, you can get down to a lot of detail. Normally you wouldn't, I would start this at a zoomed in level based on what I'm trying to document, of course, or I may segment it out. If you have lots of locations, you may segment it where you show objects like this is going to be the US and this is going to be Europe and so on. Or you might even get more granular, like very specific to cities. Here's London, here's Washington, D.C., here's, you know, Shanghai or whatever it is, and then zoom in from there, or have your map based on that specific geographic location, right? So I'm just going to go use my favorites object, and I'll grab a building here. So we'll call this the docks. So this is a built. You can have different object types. This one's called building OSPs. It's just a rectangle. I really like that one. So I'm going to come over here and use building, right? But I'm not going to do OSP. I'll do all. I'll use this guy. It looks more like a building. Right? And you can create these and change these. You can use whatever icon you want. Normally, I use actually a see-through sort of building, so I just see the map for the most part and a little outline of what the building's going to look like. So we'll call this the shipyard. Very good. So shipyard. And then over here, and normally I'd probably be a little bit more zoomed in just to get these more precise as far as the size of the buildings go. You know, I'd want it to really match sort of that street level detail. And we'll call this South End. South End, so just creating some buildings. And that's sort of the process. I mean, it's really not hard. You could import these too. If you knew all your buildings, you could stretch these out or rotate them as well. Oop, I didn't mean to do that. Let me zoom back in on where I was at. Sorry about that. You could rotate things and so on. So you don't have to display, turn that off. You could change the text too if you want to, you know, not see that. But we get to the point where you may want to bring in something like, I want to show some sort of conduit path between the two. You can drag and drop. There's shortcuts too. I was saying before, you could do things like an Excel import. If you know the latitude and longitude, you can bring all that data in. And then we integrate with other systems too. So if you have data in something you want to bring in, you can do that as well. So it just comes down to kind of what you're trying to do from that standpoint. So as far as the you know, tool itself, you can, you know, bring in these cables. You can start to add bend points and, you know, do other crazy things and so on. But in addition, besides adding conduits and pathways, which I'll get back to, you might want to also add in your cables, you know, cables with fiber strands. So we basically, you walk through, okay, how am I going to do that? Well, this really comes down to devices and equipment that you're using. So in the case of something like cables, it might be you've got some LIUs, fiber patch panels, whatever you're going to refer to them as. I'm just using the Corning 04U, so I'll just call this, you know, patch panel shipyard. And you might have manholes and handholds and other things that you're going to add in, of course. And I'll show you examples of that. I'm not going to go through that whole process. I'm just trying to show you kind of where you might start if you want to start trying to try out the tool, kind of play around with the tool sort of thing. It's not hard to get started at all. Again, I'm just doing this obviously from a manual standpoint, but next thing I might do is bring in something with fiber. So over here, I've got different fiber, 24 strand and so on. Now, because I'm connecting what we call an interdiagram connection, it's a little bit different process. I'm going to use some shortcuts here, Control C, Control L, or you could do it where you come up and say copy, and then you go to the other end, and let's say here, and I want to connect up to here, and then I could use the shortcut Control C and then Control L. I can also actually just do a copy connect to and create connections that way too. So the point is, you know, this is sort of the process, or well, again, the process if you're doing things manually, not doing some sort of bulk import, the process you might go through to start to create all these connections. So what does that all mean to you? You know, you do this and what's it sort of look like? So let me just show you something that's a little more built out from that standpoint, and answering those questions of pathways and other things. So in the case of this particular example, I'm showing different buildings right on campus, and then I've got different pathways, in this case duct banks. I also have conduits. So you might have a relationship of duct bank to conduit. So here's conduit path, and I've got other conduit paths. But you can build these relationships too in the software. So you hopefully get to the point where you can visually see something. Oh, here's a path, a segment of the duct, or again of conduit, depending on terminology and what you guys are doing in your environment. But I can, you know, select that particular segment and actually see, you know, what's inside of that particular duct bank, or what I've told the system. Hey, inside this segment of duct bank, there is a conduit, and that conduit I can do show on diagram. That conduit really follows the same path in this case, that segment that we were in or showing. So now it highlights it and says, hey, here I am. But I can also select that particular conduit and also see what's inside of that from the standpoint of, is there a cable in here? So in this case, a fiber cable. And there's a big 288 strand fiber cable that's associated with that piece of conduit, the conduit segment. And you would normally associate a fiber cable that might run through many manholes and terminate between two buildings kind of thing. You would associate that with multiple pieces of conduit. So you know its exact physical path that it follows. Now I'll do a show on diagram. This is going to show me the endpoint connection, in this case for the cable. But if I want to see that cable, for instance, this is the cable here. It's pointing at it. On the left-hand side, there it says strands, strandless report. But it says containers. So if somebody asks me, you know, this cable, where does it actually, what's its path? I can go in and look at that, and I can say, oh, well, it's basically the start, you know, plant science, and runs through the manhole, and it goes from manhole to manhole and manhole to splice, and splice to manhole, and manhole to bio research. So it starts really at plant science and ends at bio research, but then it's got these interim pathways that it follows. Now, it may or may not be spliced along the way, because it may just be a full physical run. It might just be a home run between the 2 points, which is fine. But let me go back. So this particular cable runs between 2 buildings. It's got multiple segments, you know, conduits that it's in. And the cable itself, if you want to know anything about it from the standpoint of this cable, on the left-hand side, in addition to knowing what its pathway is, I can also look at something like the Strand Interface for it. So this is where you get into, I'll use my little draw tool. Let's see what happens here. So here you've got the buffer tube color, strand color, This is if you're going to, if you want it to be excluded from what we call the ACRA, which is if you're going to do defined circuit paths, you don't have to, but there's a feature in the tool that allows you to do that. This is just telling you if it's connected. So if it's green, that means that this strand is actually in use versus gray where it's not in use. And then you can mark it as active or not. So if you know you have a bad cable, bad strand, you can mark it as bad. Now this one's bad and also connected, so might investigate that. I actually was playing with this earlier, so I had set that. But you can also set the mode. You can change the name of the strands. By default, they're just usually numbered. And then you can add fields to basically allows you to put in information about the strands that you want to. In this case, I just have two fields defined, one called customer, one called comment. You could add additional columns of data as well if you wanted to do that. So clear all, clear all. There you go. Neat. So if I click OK here, well, that actually closed it. I didn't mean to do that. Let me open this back up. What I wanted to do was click on the interface here. So if I click on that, it shows me the strands, right? Each strand, and then if it's connected. So strand 1's connected from B1 to B1, strand 2, B2 to B2, strand 3, B3, B3, and so on. You get the idea. So if I go down here, this one's not connected. Strand 14's not connected at all. Strand 16's not connected. Strand 17's not. But I can connect it. I can click on strand 14 and say, oh, this goes from F1 to B14. Just click on it, right? So pretty easy to do. That's how we manage the strands. So when you have a cable, you click, and that helps you basically manage. So close that, and, close that. So now the strands are connected up between the 2 points, and then those strands can then be used. Of course, they're connected already, so they're in use, but they also represent part of a pathway of connections, right, end to end. So what I mean by that is what we refer to as a CLR, circular record, or physical path, however you want to sort of view it. So if I double click on this and drill down into it, I have a device, right? Here's a bunch of ports on the device. By the way, these ports are generated automatically when you drag a device from the catalog. You get the ports or the slots for cards and so on. So if I come down here, I've got a fiber patch, basically going from this port to here, here being the fiber patch panel. And if I double click on that, it will show me that this is the PBN. In fact, I can turn that on if I want to see that. So, right. So that's the PBN I just came from. That's its port. This is a reference port. So it's just saying, hey, this is the thing that we just came from. It's connected to F1 of the patch panel. This is a card, slot A. And there's a cross connect that goes from F1 to B1. So this is the same device. It's just the patch panel, basically. And then on this side, there's a little blue dot, which means that is a strand connected to B1 from some cable. The cable's down here. It's the 288 strand fiber cable I was talking about earlier, right? And it's strand number 1, buffer colored blue. So there you go. And that gives you the full pathway. So you could follow that manually, just sort of double click and follow the path kind of thing. You can also double click and generate what we refer to as the CLR, which is the circuit layout record. So when that comes up. So when you look at the CLR, it's this particular one, swim lane CLR, shows you hierarchy versus physical path. So go up to my wonderful new toy here. This would be hierarchy. So this is physical, University U of M, University of Maryland. Bio research, that's the building. First floor, rack A, device, and this is the port for this device. Okay, so that's just the hierarchy. Each one of these represents a different connection point in the hierarchy. These two this is actually the same device, except this is the one side of the patch panel and this is the other. So it's like front and back. So this is the front port and the back port, and this is card A. We were just talking about that when we saw. And this is the path it takes. So this is the fiber cable. This is a cross connect between the patch panel. And then you get into, here's a strand off of the cable. So if I click back on my mouse and I click, you'll see the strand information, right? So, and that's sort of it. You know, you just get into this full physical path view from end to end. So, and on the other end, you've got building, and this also goes inside and outside plant. So let's try a different color. Try blue. So here we've got, you know, this is a building here, but this is actually a manhole on the campus, and this is a splice device, and this is actually a card inside the splice device. I'm going to go to that and show it to you. So let me clear this craziness. Go back to my mouse here, and I'll double click, and this should take me to inside the splice box. So this probably looks familiar to some of you guys out there. So it's my splice box. And so I'm in a manhole, right? If I go up one more, you'll see myself on the map. So it's like I'm peeking my head out of the hole, seeing the map where I'm at. If I double click and drill back down, that's the splice box, and drill down again. And these are the cards. So these are the CommScope cards that are inside this particular CommScope box. And if I double click and drill down in there, then I get to the point where I'm seeing the actual splicing. And we handle the splice, you know, where you put in basically a cable strands for the cable coming in one side and strands for another cable coming into the other side. So usually they'd be different cables. So this is a 72 strand cable, strand 1, again, buffer color blue, and this is strand 1, but it's a different cable. It's that 288 strand. So this is where the strand 1 basically connects for this, or terminates to, because it actually starts in the PBN on the other side. Well, patch panel, I should say. So, oops, sorry about that. My mouse is a little tricky sometimes. So here, you know, we've got the splicing happening, and if I go up a level again, I would see information. Now, with a lot of these things, you can run different reports. You know, like if you want to know all the connection points for this splice manhole, I can right click and come down and run a report, show me all the what we call the CLR endpoints for the report. I don't think this one takes very long to run. I had actually previously run this one because that takes a little bit of time. This one usually doesn't take too long, but that's basically this report here. And what it's answering the question is, if, you know, if something were to happen to this box, this splicing box, you know, the typical backhoe story, somebody dug it up or cut the cable or cables, you know, what's impacted. So in this case, you can see local connections for the box and then all the endpoints that it runs out to. So I know, you know, this thing goes from here locally, it goes out. There's some connection for port 1 or to port 1 of the PBN. In fact, that's the one we had just come from, where I was showing you port 1 of the PBN. And then this one's card A, port B1, and that goes over to the rack directly in Jimenez Hall, and so on. So you can kind of see all those connections in one view. There's different views you can take. There's one that's, this is a full path where it divides sort of all the hops up. It's a little more intense when you run it, so it takes a few minutes to run. But this one shows you the full path from end to end. So, and again, this is based on where you are in the system. So it helps to answer that eternal question of what is my, you know, where do my splice points connect to in case something were to happen. You know, the one thing about netTerrain is the data is in the system. So maybe these reports aren't exactly the way you want to see the data, but you can, there's other reports that you could run, or most of the time, a lot of customers come and say, you know, I want a report that's this way, because it may not be straight out of the box. And you can create your own. We've got a reporting engine tool, so you can write your own reports and other things. If you're a customer, you can request reports too through our portal. Most of the basic, most of the common reports are things that we'll write, and it's just part of maintenance, so it's pretty good. So anyway, I've been talking for a while. We got about 4 minutes left, so I'm going to stop this and just see if there's any questions that I can answer for starters, and kind of go from there. So if you have questions, let me know. Just post them in the thing, the open question area, and I'll do my best. If you do have questions afterwards, or you want to, see how to use the software and so on, you can go to netTerrain.com and get a 14-day trial. You don't have to install it. You can just run it on our cloud, and pretty much do all the stuff I was showing you there. I recommend that you go into the help section and check out. There's different help options in there. There's some videos. There's some links to actually some of the demo projects I just showed. There is help. There's where you download the user guide. If you go get the user guide, pay attention to the outside plant section. Getting started in some areas is easy, dragging and dropping, creating some conduits and paths and stuff. It's not too hard, but when you get into bundling links or, adding those fiber cables with strands and all that, you got to know kind of where to look and where to go. So it's a little more complicated. It's not terribly hard, but you might have to read a little bit about it, or just give us a call. We're happy to spend, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever with you, and walk you through some basics if you need it. So happy to help out there. I don't have any questions coming up, so I will assume we're all set, and hopefully you guys, whoa. Do you track blown fiber? Yeah, I mean, fiber's fiber. So if you're doing blown where it's basically a direct run between 2 points, it's really no different than other fiber that gets spliced. I know you're not splicing in between, you're just blowing it through, which is fine. It's just A to B. It's still a strand, and still works really kind of the same way. I have a few customers that don't really splice. It's just really all home run fiber, usually from some central location. So if you want to talk about that or see that, I'm happy to kind of show you, because it's not really manufacturer specific either. I know there's a particular company I think that does that blown fiber. I can't remember who it was, but once you add a fiber in, you want to add a strand, you can do it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be part of a bundled set of fiber. If you're just adding one strand through, you could track that differently. So it's up to you. But good question. Anything else? Going once, going twice. But again, if you have questions, just call us or send us an email. Support. Actually, I would send it to probably sales@graphicalnetworks.com. Unless you're a customer, then you can certainly do support or open a ticket in Zendesk if you have questions or want to see something. We're happy to walk you through things and just answer questions. You might want to make sure it's the right fit. It may or may not be, right? You might be looking for something a little bit different, which is fine. Anyway, thanks guys for your time. Appreciate it.